Certainly a lot to keep a hold on. Senator Warner, of course, joining us. Senator, we've heard some about Senator Reid's plan, maybe a $2.7 trillion debt reduction plan. It would have no revenue increases, meaning no tax hikes of any sort or tax breaks that would be eliminated. Would that have your vote right now?
Well, if it gets through the debt ceiling, this seems to be what some of the House Republicans had asked for, at least an amount of cuts that would get us through the next 2 years. As Standard & Poor's has pointed out repeatedly, if we do these short-term, lurching back and forth, short-term raising of the debt ceiling, they might still downgrade our debt. So this seems to be what the House Republicans have asked for. I still think it's going to be a little hard to get $2.7 trillion just in cuts. I'd like to see how those cuts lay out.
One of the ways it seems like, and again, we're getting this in bits and pieces, so love your thoughts on this. One of the ways it seems like we're getting to those $2.7 trillion in cuts is to include $1 trillion in cuts because we're winding down the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Does that really count? Is that really the type of cuts we need to do in the government to save ourselves from our own debt crisis?
Well, Jenna, I think we need to be more specific, but we should remember that actually Mr. Ryan's budget included that $1 trillion figure. That was what was trumpeted out of the House. And if it was good for Mr. Ryan's plan, I guess it should be good for Senator Reid's plan. I still think, at the end of the day, you're going to need a more comprehensive approach that takes on tax reform, that takes on entitlement reform. And I look around at all this back and forth bickering, and the only bipartisan plan that's out there that gets us close to that $4 trillion number is the Gang of Six effort. I hope at some point we can use this at least as a fallback, or if there's a new commission and they don't get to some agreement. Our plan has taken some arrows from both sides, but it really gets us there with some real cuts and real reforms.
I think you guys should have like leather jackets, like a team jacket as you walk in Gang of Six. It sort of sounds like that, doesn't it? Let's get to some of those specifics that you mentioned, because your plan has been interesting in what we've learned about it. I'd like to ask you specifically about one part that affects the middle class. We hear that there would be some changes in the tax for mortgage deduction tax breaks, for example, or charitable donation tax breaks. So we've heard that they would be eliminated, or maybe they would be reduced, and that could really affect the middle class families that count on some of those deductions. Your fellow Democrats have said they're not for this at all. Can you tell us more specifically about this?
We are not by any means saying that those deductions should be eliminated. We are saying that if we're going to try to lower rates for middle-class taxpayers, if we're going to try to simplify the tax code, if we're going to try to generate some additional revenue for deficit reduction, but at the same time make the tax code simpler, the way you pay for that is by cutting back on tax code exemptions, similar to the way and Bowles did. Maybe what we would say, for example, around home mortgages is not let somebody deduct the full cost of their second home mortgage, and maybe on the first home you might cap it at $600,000, $700,000. Those would be parts of the debate going forward. It's really a function of how low you want the rates to be in terms of what is in the current tax code. We can bring down rates, for example, on the top end, about 10 points. The trade-off has to be, how much are you willing to give up on some of these tax expenditures? For example, on charitable, let me just one example here. On charitable, we might say, let's go ahead and allow the first $100,000 to be fully deductible, and then after that, get a half deduction. That would still give, for most people who want to give to their church or want to give to a local charity, that would be fully deductible. So I think there's a way to work this through. At the end of the day, we've got to realize we've got to get close to $4 trillion off of this over the next 10 years, or we're going to be right back here a few months from now having this same debate.
And it sounds reasonable, at least from the outside, listening to the insights, to some of these specifics. So if I'm your average American family that owns one home, does some charitable donations, some of the things you're talking about wouldn't necessarily affect me. The question then becomes, though, are you going to get anyone to get on board? Does it seem like you can get enough Democrats from the Senate to something like this that could be turned to look like where the middle class is not getting the tax breaks that they once had?
Well, I think there is. I mean, we had 49 senators show up last Tuesday, and within 24 hours, we had 36 of them on a letter about an equal number of Democrats and Republicans saying, hey, this isn't perfect, but let's move forward. This is comprehensive. It's bipartisan. It touches all the areas that we've all agreed on. We've got to reform the tax code. We've got to reform the entitlement programs. And relatively modest. This is about $3.7 trillion. We really are going to have to even go beyond that. And if people are starting to draw bright lines and saying we can't even do that much, I'm not sure how we're ever going to really solve this problem, which I think is facing our nation.
Well, it does seem impossible. And we talk about gridlock. We use all these different terms to talk about what's happening in D.C. You're the one that's actually living it, and we seem to have this deadline obviously looming when it comes to the debt ceiling. So just getting back to that real quick here, we have those deficit reduction plans that are larger packages like you're talking about, but in the short term, are you for just a temporary increase in this debt ceiling?
Well, listen, I think the temporary, and I'd come back to Standard & Poor's, which said if you do a temporary increase, you'll probably see a downgrade of our debt. That would end up being a tax increase for every American. If we have a default, that would be a tax increase for every American family, the immediate higher interest rate costs and dramatic decline in the stock market. It's not a good way to go about this. I want to make sure we've got the debt limit increased. I want to make sure we've got a plan to comprehensively address this problem. At the end of the day, both sides are going to have to give. I'm not saying our plan's perfect, but we've got, over a third of the Senate, equal number of Democrats, Republicans saying this ought to be a path forward to kind of dismiss this work that really has built upon the Simpson-Bowles Commission that's been out there for almost a year. I think we'll be very short-sighted.
Senator Warner, it's always nice to speak with you. We appreciate your time, such a busy day. And we look forward